The bell chimed as the glass door swung open. A cold gust of wind rushed into the small diner, carrying with it a man in an expensive suit. His leather shoes clicked against the tiled floor as he strode in, exuding an air of arrogance. He barely glanced at the other customers before marching toward the counter. Behind the register stood Danny, a young man with Down syndrome. His bright smile never wavered, even as he fumbled slightly with the touchscreen. Hi, sir. Welcome to Joe's Diner. How can I help you? The suited man scoffed, glancing around impatiently. Seriously, they're letting you take orders now. His voice was loud enough for the other customers to hear. Some heads turned, but most pretended not to notice. A few shifted uncomfortably. Danny's hands trembled as he tried to tap the screen. Sorry, sir. Just a second. The man rolled his eyes. Unbelievable. I don't have all day. Can't they hire normal people? He leaned forward, sneering. Do you even know what you're doing, or should I call a manager? A hush fell over the diner. At a corner booth, a man in a worn leather jacket set down his coffee. He had been quietly observing, his dark eyes sharp with something unreadable. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his hair fell just past his shoulders. He didn't say a word, yet. He simply watched. Danny's lower lip quivered, but he forced a smile. I can do it, sir. Just tell me why your order. The suited man sighed dramatically. Fine. Double espresso, extra hot. And don't mess it up. Danny nodded quickly, punching in the order. His fingers slipped once, causing the wrong item to pop up on the screen. The man groaned. Are you serious right now? Before Danny could respond, a deep, calm voice broke the tension. Seems like you're in a hurry, the man in the leather jacket said. His voice was gentle, but there was a weight to it. A voice that made people listen. The suited man turned, annoyed. Yeah, and, the man tilted his head slightly. Then why are you wasting time humiliating someone who's just doing his job? A flicker of recognition passed through the suited man's eyes as he got a proper look at him. The diner grew even quieter. A waitress froze mid-step. The cook behind the counter stopped flipping a pancake. The suited man swallowed. His voice lost a bit of its edge. Wait. The man gave a small, knowing smile. He leaned back, taking a slow sip of his coffee. Keanu Reeves didn't need to introduce himself. The suited man's demeanor shifted slightly, a flicker of nervousness crossing his face. Look, he muttered, I didn't mean anything by it. I was just in a hurry. Keanu placed his cup down gently, the soft clink echoing in the silence of the diner. His eyes didn't waver as he spoke. Being in a hurry doesn't give you the right to treat someone like that. His tone was calm, but there was a quiet firmness behind it that made the suited man uncomfortable. The man glanced around, noticing how everyone in the diner was now staring at him. A faint flush crept up his neck. I wasn't trying to. Look, I just want my coffee, okay? Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering just enough to make it feel personal. You think that's all this is about? Coffee. He gestured subtly toward Danny, who stood frozen behind the counter, clutching the edge of the register with trembling hands. This young man's been working hard to serve you, and all you've done is tear him down. The suited man shifted uncomfortably, his polished confidence cracking. I didn't mean it like that, he mumbled, avoiding Keanu's gaze. Danny finally found his voice, though it was shaky. It's okay. I'll fix the order. His smile was faint, his usual brightness dimmed. Keanu shook his head slightly, his eyes never leaving the suited man. No, it's not okay. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. You walk in here, dressed to impress, thinking your time is more valuable than anyone else's. But tell me something. What does that suit mean if you don't have basic decency? The room felt charged, the tension thick in the air. The suited man opened his mouth to respond but found no words. Keanu leaned back, his calm exterior unshaken. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And from where I'm sitting, Danny's earned a lot more of it than you have today. The suited man's face reddened as he glanced at Danny, then back at Keanu. For the first time, he looked genuinely unsure of himself. I didn't mean to upset anyone, he muttered. Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression softening just a fraction. Apologies don't mean much without action. The suited man hesitated, glancing back at Danny. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to say something, but instead, he turned and walked out of the diner without another word. The bell chimed as the door swung shut behind him. A heavy silence hung in the air until Danny spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Gee, thank you, sir." Keanu smiled warmly at him. "Don't thank me. You're doing great." He stood, pulling a $20 bill from his wallet and sliding it across the counter. "Keep the change." But just as he turned to leave, the waitress by the kitchen stepped forward, her face pale. "Mr. Reeves, that guy," her voice wavered. "I think he's coming back. And he's not alone." The diner fell into a tense silence. Danny's fingers gripped the counter, his eyes darting toward the glass door. Outside, the suited man stood by the curb, talking hastily to someone on the phone. Within seconds, a sleek black SUV pulled up, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. Keanu didn't move. His expression remained unreadable as he took another slow sip of his coffee. The other customers shifted nervously in their seats. The cook behind the counter muttered under his breath, "This doesn't look good." The suited man yanked the back door open, and out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man in an expensive overcoat. His graying hair was slicked back, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being in control. The moment he walked in, the temperature in the diner seemed to drop. Danny swallowed hard. I think I should go to the back." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on the counter, not taking his eyes off the newcomer. "Stay right where you are, buddy." His voice was calm, steady, protective. The suited man, now emboldened by his companion's presence, straightened his tie and smirked. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness. "It seems we got off on the wrong foot. Let me introduce you to—" "I know who he is," Keanu interrupted, finally standing. He was a full head shorter than the broad-shouldered man, but his presence somehow felt just as strong. The older man let out a dry chuckle. "Then you know it's not a good idea to embarrass my people in public." His voice was smooth, practiced, like a man who had spent years making deals that left others at a disadvantage. "You see, Robert here." He motioned toward the suited man. "He's not just some customer. He works for me." Keanu remained unfazed. "That's supposed to mean something." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It means I take care of my own. And I don't appreciate my employees being humiliated over something as insignificant as, what was it? A coffee order." He gave a casual glance toward Danny, as if he were nothing more than an afterthought. Danny shrank slightly under the man's gaze, but Keanu stepped forward just enough to block the view. His voice, still calm but sharper now, cut through the air. "You don't get it, do you?" He shook his head slightly. "This wasn't about coffee. It was about respect. And from where I'm standing, you don't have much of it." The man's expression hardened. "Careful, Mr. Reeves," he warned. "You may be a Hollywood star, but out here, you don't call the shots." Keanu let out a slow breath, then chuckled softly. It wasn't amusement, it was something else. Something dangerous. "You sure about that?" he said, tilting his head just slightly. The older man frowned, but before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. His face darkened. Whatever he saw made his grip tighten on the device. Keanu watched him, his expression calm. "That your boss calling?" The man looked up sharply. "I am the boss." Keanu's smirk was barely there, but it was enough. "No," he said simply. "You're not." And that's when the waitress gasped, pointing at the TV mounted in the corner. The news ticker flashed across the screen, and the headline made the blood drain from the man's face. Breaking. Mysterious billionaire acquires major stake in Sterling Enterprises. The older man's jaw clenched. He turned back to Keanu, his voice tight. "You," Keanu shrugged casually, "told you I call the shots." The diner was dead silent. The suited man, Robert, stared at the screen in disbelief, his face paling. His boss, the arrogant, broad-shouldered man, slowly turned back to Keanu, his fists tightening. "You bought Sterling Enterprises?" he asked, his voice now carrying an edge of barely contained anger. Keanu smiled slightly, tilting his head. "Not all of it, just enough." He picked up his coffee again, taking a slow sip as if none of this was a big deal. Enough to make decisions. Enough to have a say in who represents the company. His eyes flickered toward Robert. Robert took a shaky step back, realizing what was happening. Wait, you can't. Keanu cut him off, his voice calm but final. You're fired. Robert's face twisted in shock. You can't just fire me. He turned desperately to his boss, but the older man was still staring at the TV, his expression unreadable. The realization was sinking in fast. Keanu Reeves wasn't just some actor in this moment. He was a man with power. And he had just made his move. The boss took a slow breath, adjusting his coat. He wasn't used to being outplayed. You're making a mistake, Mr. Reeves, he said, his voice lower now, more controlled. Business isn't a game, and I don't take kindly to. Keanu leaned forward just slightly, his expression unreadable. Neither do I. He let those words hang in the air. The older man studied him for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the diner, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. Robert hesitated for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something, but then he scurried after his boss. The black SUV's engine roared to life, and within seconds, they were gone. For a moment, there was nothing but stunned silence. Then the cook let out a low whistle. Damn, the waitress blinked. Did that just really happen? Danny, still clutching the counter, finally found his voice. Mr. Reeves. What just happened? Keanu turned back to him, his expression softening. Just a little reminder, he said, slipping a few more bills onto the counter as a tip. That kindness matters more than power. Danny looked at the money, then at Keanu, his eyes wide with gratitude. Thank you, sir. Keanu gave him a small nod, then turned toward the door. As he reached for the handle, he paused, glancing back at the diner full of stunned faces. You judged me by my movies, he said, a ghost of a smirk on his lips. They judged me by my clothes. But real power is knowing when to stand up for the right people. With that, he pushed open the door, stepping out into the cold. The bell chimed one last time. The diner remained still for a few moments after Keanu left, as if the weight of what had just happened was still settling in. Then, slowly, life returned to the place. Conversations resumed, the cook went back to flipping pancakes, and the waitress wiped down the counter, shaking her head in disbelief. Danny stood behind the register, his hands still trembling, but not from fear anymore. This time, it was something else. A kind of warmth, a feeling he wasn't used to. Someone had stood up for him. Someone important. The door swung open again. Not Keanu this time, but a mother with her young son. She smiled at Danny as she approached the counter. Hey there, she said warmly. I've heard you make the best milkshakes in town. Think you can whip one up for my little guy? Danny blinked. Then slowly, a real smile spread across his face. Why yeah, he said, his voice steadier now. I see can do that. And as he turned to make the order, the small TV above the counter flickered again. The news anchor was still talking about the surprise business move, still trying to piece together why one of Hollywood's biggest stars had just shaken up the corporate world. But in the diner, everyone already knew the answer. Keanu Reeves wasn't just a movie star. He was something far more rare. A good man.